For ages, painters have and continue to be taken, as it were, by the subject of dreams. They are everywhere in art, just as they are fixed in the lives of most people. Dreams, dreaming, and the figure of the dreamer are presented in literature, sculpture, music, and painting, even architecture. Prophetic, allegorical, visionary, healing dreams and nightmares have inspired artists throughout history. Dreams may be studied in the context of mythology and have been presented in allegory. The countless dreaming figures in history and in religion are celebrated by artists, and, unlike the dream itself, their works are preserved and may be kept, having been rescued and pulled from behind the veil of the unconscious. Given its ubiquity in the arts, let's focus upon a particular phenomenon, the figure of the daydreamer, which, as it turns out, is a relatively modern apparition. Daydreaming was invented in the 19th century, which is to say, it was first recognized, named, and studied in modernity. Daydreaming is new. Unlike their predecessors, Enlightenment philosophers such as Kant, John Locke, and Cabanis, who believed sleep and dreams necessary, but only as vegetative, automatic states, and were not valued as productive. Thinkers in the age of Romanticism began, in the 19th century, to explore various states of unconsciousness, extreme states of being and perception such as melancholy, fantasy, visions, madness, and death, as liminal states, having great importance in the context of individual character and identity. The subject of dreams was engaged by Romantic artists as a means to express the novelty of individual imagination, the subjective and enigmatic nature of experience and memory. Modern artists were compelled to examine closely a new world of inward existence. The 19th century witnessed the birth of modern psychology. The most prominent figures in the science of dream study in the period are well known and include Pinel, Escriol, and Charcot. Although they did not attach a great importance to dreams and dreamings as altered states, their writings were widely published and did much to increase public awareness of dreaming and unconscious modes of being as operating within and influencing waking life. In art, interest in the depiction of dreams and dreaming as a dynamic, fantastical aspect of the human condition did not subside with the waning of Romanticism and the advent of the clear-headed naturalism and concrete materialism of the aesthetics of realism and impressionism. Sleeping and dreaming figures are common in the mid-19th century and are represented in a variety of contexts, as we see in these examples by leading French realist painter Gustave Courbet. As one 19th-century art critic and theorist claimed, the research of contemporary biologists, neurologists, and psychologists pertaining to human sensation, perception, and cognition had an extremely powerful effect on the arts of the time. Many artists became dedicated to exploring and representing with precision states of unconsciousness, making use of positivist methodologies, scientific investigation, uncovering the depths of dynamic psychological forces heretofore neglected or obfuscated. Perhaps this is more pronounced in literature. It's certainly recognized by literary historians. One could trace the increasing focus upon the interior being and motivations of characterization, let's say, that run speculatively and quickly from Stendhal to Flaubert, Dostoevsky to George Eliot and Henry James, to Proust, to Flower in the works of Virginia Woolf. Those recognizing the scope of the unconscious mind, its vast and unmapped territory, began to ask, what faculties of mind subsist or are withdrawn during sleep? Does one think while dreaming? And what aspects of human nature and individual identity are revealed by the dreamer? These are questions far removed from the traditions of chapbook and dream book literature, the manners and modes of simply relating the antiquated significance of images and symbols in dreams. Rather, the questions now asked concern the origins of dreams, their evolution in human history, and their manifestation in social and individual identity. Indeed, some scientists began to believe there may be two separate personalities, one that dominates sleep, while another the fully awake conscious mind. Should sleep and waking be thought of as two distinct states producing a double consciousness or dual personality? Let us return to this question. According to the Oxford English Dictionary, the first use of the word daydream as a verb was around 1830. This corresponds to the increased attention and study given specifically to daydreams by philosophers and psychologists who recognized the special condition of daydreams, namely, the interposition of daydreams between the realms of sleep and the nominal processes of conscious thought. We may turn to the work of Hippolyte Taine, said to be the father of literary historicism, to understand the new ideas about the twinned relationship between daydreaming and the lucid, more rational mode of consciousness. Taine was an art historian, critic, and philosopher who published over a dozen books on various subjects. His volume entitled On Intelligence, published in 1870, available in translation, became after its publication one of the most influential studies on psychology exploring the relationship between sensation, perception, and human intelligence. In accordance with recent trends, Taine moved away from a pathological examination of dreams, and in On Intelligence no longer focused on the study of normal and or abnormal behavior. Rather, he discussed dreams in terms of mental representation itself, its relation to perception and cognition. For Taine and others specializing in dream study in the 19th century, the daydream was at the bottom of an ascending hierarchy of heightening dream states that included daydreams, night dreams, forms of ecstasy, hallucinations, and full-blown schizophrenia. As a specific phenomenon, the daydream was identified as a condition in which the dreamer is neither unconscious, sleeping, nor fully apperceptive, comprising a state that shares qualities and faculties of mind belonging to both dreaming and fully conscious sensation and perception. The daydreamer manifests a condition thought to be natural to man, as are select other forms of dreaming, inhabiting a middle ground between unconsciousness and conscious states. Schilling was not the only philosopher to express the belief that daydreaming is an activity that makes evident the hidden force behind, quote, even the commonest and most everyday human production, end quote. To summarize these ideas briefly, Enlightenment scholars such as Immanuel Kant, in keeping with Cartesian dualism, Kant's ideas about, quote, clear and dark perceptions, end quote, which cast dreams into the realm of pathology and neurosis, were challenged by the generation of Romantic philosophers, Schopenhauer and others, who concluded that these so-called dark perceptions were, in fact, a significant source for human feeling, instinct, individual will, and creative inspiration. It came to be said, ideas without consciousness must be possible, and the mind was a synthesizing organ, that particular states of being united the dynamic fractious principle of the unconscious with the stable perspicacious qualities of consciousness, what Oliver Wendell Holmes called, quote, the mechanisms of thought, end quote, became a subject of philosophical inquiry and scientific study in the second half of the 19th century. Figures such as Dumont, Brennevier, Janet, and Henry Bergson identified daydreams as a condition in which one performs an act of, quote, unconscious cerebration, end quote. The leading diagnosticians of mental alienation, such as Pierre Janet, classified daydreaming as creating a disturbance in the attention given, quote, the function of reality, end quote, thus made possible through what he called a narrowing of the field of consciousness. Because one's attention to the function of reality was a level of consciousness considered the most difficult operation, acting upon exterior objects, changing reality, coordinating the mind with will and action, attention to the present moment was considered by Janet to be the highest, most complex expression in the evolution of consciousness. Thus, in a Darwinian model, it was believed the most recent to develop in man and to be the first and most certain to fade. The condition has been described by historian Henri Ellenberger in his important book, The Unconscious Before Freud. Quote, the natural tendency of the mind is to roam the past and the future. It requires a certain effort to keep one's attention in the present, and still more to concentrate it on present action, end quote. Daydreaming was an activity deemed to be operative on a lower disinterested level and was identified with habitual actions, automatic functions, representative memory, and fantasy. Daydreaming was thought the consequence of a relaxation of an individual's psychological tension, that is to say, the result of an inability or unwillingness to form or sustain contact with reality through direct association and immediate response. Daydreaming was understood to be a condition natural to man, distinguished by the mild relaxation of the faculties of concentration and discretion, and it was a state of being recognized as having ancient origins. It was said a daydreamer dreams as the result of the loosening of the cerebral mechanisms governing the associative relationships between the self and the world. Yet, considering the immense depth of the unconscious, the daydreamer was understood to be acting merely upon its surface. In the daydream, there was not a total relaxation of psychological tension. Disassociation is not complete, and the daydreamer maintains a connection to the world outside of his dreaming thoughts. Looking closely at Dante Gabriel Rossetti's well-known example of the subject, The Daydream from 1880, we see a beautiful woman dressed in an emerald green robe sitting beneath honeysuckle bushes. Grasping loosely a branch before her, the figure is shown to hold a sprig with several of the extremely fragrant paired tubular red flowers over the pages of an open book. Depicted in three-quarter pose, she appears ostensibly as a meditative figure looking outward with a staid, fixed countenance suggesting a preoccupation with her own thoughts. For reasons of its own, Rossetti's picture is remarkable. Declared to be the artist's favorite portrait of Jane Morris, his best remembered model, everything about the painting informs us of its allegorical conception. Dressed in an antique robe, sitting with her legs crossed within a summarily rendered pastoral corner of nature, looking out with a vapid, indeed forgetful gaze as blossoms fall from her hand. The image is replete with motifs that communicate emblematically the emotions of a grieving woman who languishes for lost love. The daydreamer pictured in Rossetti's painting is an allegorical figure characterizing the condition of unrequited love. It is appropriate, then, that the artist has given prominence to the precise depiction of honeysuckle flowers. This unique, beautiful, and fragrant flower was universally considered, in the language of flowers, to be symbolic of, quote, the chains of love. Now, in light of modern notions about the nature of emotional expression, Rossetti's daydreamer could be likened psychologically to an individual who suffers from the condition of idée fixe, a type of mental disorder defined by psychologists and neurologists as a persisting and injurious preoccupation with a particular subject or idea, attributable to melancholia and hysterics. Some historians discuss Rossetti's painting in terms of the modern science of dynamic psychiatry, but do so within the context of 19th-century social precepts and prejudices. In this way, Rossetti's painting is understood to be an idiomatic representation of the role of women and feminine identity, as well as feminine sensitivity, weakness, and vulnerability, within a culture rife with forms of art catering to the erotic fantasies and carnal desires of men. This type of allegorical presentation comprised an almost ready-made image in late-century painting, and may be seen in numerous works by the British academic painter John William Godward. Looking again at several of his paintings, it may be said he created a type of niche or portfolio in which a lone, youthful, and beautiful woman characterized by a wistful, remote, or meditative countenance is shown in an abstracted theatrical setting. Differing in important ways from Rossetti's manners and modes, Godward's academic realism, a style we may associate with neoclassical manners and modes, is ideally suited to the source material presented in his works. Said to be interested in the history of classical civilizations, Godward shared his pastime with his artistic circle, who wished to appeal to the sensibilities of an upper-class educated clientele. Considering the daydreamer as an allegory of lost love within the themes of melancholy, reverie, and past civilizations, nothing prepares us for the forward-sitting figure looking outward in the direction of the viewer shown against a scumbled, vague background. Berthe Morisot's final masterpiece, finished 6 months before her sudden death, Julie Daydreaming, dated to 1894, expresses much more completely contemporary ideas about dreams, dreaming, and the dreamer. One of at least 80 paintings portraying the artist's daughter, Julie Daydreaming is the last major work in a series that constitutes one of the most impressive and long-lasting relationships between an artist and subject in 19th-century painting. With other drawings, prints, and sculptures, portraits of Julie number over 100. Let's look at quickly several examples, images of Julie shown in series, in advancing stages of childhood. When doing so, it's important to note these portraits also make known the painter's transforming aesthetics, Morisot's maturing painterly manners and modes. The works together constitute, in fact, an unique form of visual biography, what I have called a type of baby biography. Julie is pictured from infancy to adulthood, expanding radically the tradition of baby books and albums documenting threshold events of first steps and first words. Engaged in various activities associated with the growth of an individual, the works depict the world of play, the discoveries in reading, learning to draw and play music, the realms of nature, and the bonds of friendship. Many of the works are pedagogical. These portraits of Julie themselves invite a project for study. They may be seen to present a history of the life of the child and the conditions of childhood in terms of new scientific and historical ideas about children and childhood in the 19th century, a period that historians have come to call the century of the child. Changes in our understanding about childhood present complex issues when considering Morisot's oeuvre. To make sense of the works, we would need to consider advances in science, biology, and psychology, changes in family dynamics, the development of the institutions of pedagogy, as well as other factors. Interestingly, when first trying to understand the nature of human physical and mental development and evolution, 18th and 19th century scientists and historians began by focusing on the world of children and childhood. Begin to understand the workings of a child's mind and body, and you begin to see how ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. Complex thematic and stylistic works, these examples in the series, such as the cherry pickers and the little flute players, represent a type of real allegory, paintings in which the real-world figure before us is revealed to exist in a type of mythic narrative and context, removed from the everyday to a world of nature transformed by the presence of the figure and their actions. These works themselves become expressive of the condition of a dream world, the mind of the dreamer. Not surprisingly, music was considered to be a catalyst for the onset of dreaming states, as noted in the works of painters, poets, novelists, and composers throughout the period. We see a young woman. Julie was 16 when the painting was executed, shown appearing to be seated, facing the viewer, an imminent, monumental pyramidal form silhouetted against a neutral, abstracted background. Slouched with slumped shoulders, and having crossed her legs, with her elbow braced on her knee, looking out from narrowed eyes, she has raised her right hand to the side of her face in a gesture suggestive of an absorbed mind. In a picture ostensibly dedicated to representing inward, meditative qualities, Morisot has given emphasis to the corporal body, rendering it in an extremely expressive and eloquent manner. By eliminating almost all reference to anecdote, narrative, and a recognizable everyday environment, the artist has cast aside the realist aesthetic principles of mainstream Impressionism. Portrait representing a unique condition of existence, the private interior life of the mind, the artist has given priority to the corporal body as the primary purveyor of meaning. In contrast to Julie daydreaming, daydreaming from 1877, now seen, the only other painting presenting the subject by the artist and shown to the public at the Fourth Impressionist exhibition, we see a handsome, well-dressed woman sitting in front of a window upon a couch, looking out at the viewer while holding a fan. It is a painting presenting the accoutrement of a contemporary genre scene. Clearly, these works are the result of radically different conceptions and make known Morisot's transformation from a realist impressionist mode to a symbolist painter. As her friend, the French symbolist poet Mallarmé, stated, The goal of symbolist aesthetics is not to name a thing, but to evoke, to suggest. Quoting Mallarmé, to suggest, that is the dream. It is the perfect use of this mystery that constitutes the symbol, to evoke an object gradually in order to reveal a state of the soul, or inversely, to choose an object and from it identify a state of the soul by a series of deciphering operations. There must always be enigma in poetry. End quote. We can see how closely Morisot attended to ideas advanced through modern dynamic psychology in this last major portrait of her daughter. Shown in an abstracted context, Julie inhabits an environment that favors liberty and inspires reverie. She is no longer responsible to the demands of personal interaction with people and things. Daydreaming, again, a nominal activity common to everyone, indeed a state believed by psychologists the default condition of the exercising mind, thus having universal significance, corresponds ideally with the purpose and methods of late-century symbolist art. Julie is unfettered to the conditions of her everyday existence and sits interposed, as it were, between realms of the fully conscious and subconscious. The event is shown not to be a child's pastime, nor an adult's fantasy life invoking past civilizations replete with emblematic flowers, antique robes, and classical architecture. Emulating select works of portraiture by Romantic artists, and in accordance with ideas about the dual or compound, multivalent nature of identity forwarded by modern philosophers and psychologists, Morisot has created a work that responds to physiognomic investigations dedicated to understanding the origins and meaning of behavior and facial expression. As with fellow symbolist artists, she was conversant with ideas in the sciences of ethology, anthropology, biology, and psychology, and was fascinated by the notion of the human face as capable at once of manifesting dual, distinct aspects of personality and character. Giving great emphasis to the head and face, portraiture is, after all, the genre of art responsible to the presentation of identity. The painter has purposefully shown Julie's face and its expression as multivalent, dividing her countenance into two distinct halves. Looking closely at the work, Julie's head and facial expression, we can see the right side, to the viewer's left, has been rendered with a pinkish flesh tone, has been given great warmth through greater depth and texture, and manifests the condition of physical comfort and psychological serenity. The left side, however, has been painted using lighter pigments, etiolated, whitened, and insalubrious contrast with the roseate glow and vitality of the right side. The bifurcation of facial expression as a means to communicate the complex, compound nature of human identity and personality, an important aspect of Romantic aesthetics, as mentioned, was, in fact, supported by scientists studying the origins and mechanisms of facial expressivity. The idea of bifurcated or split facial features had been examined closely by Benjamin Armand Duchenne in his eccentric treatise Mechanisms of Human Physiognomy, an electrophysiological analysis of the expression of passions applicable to the arts, published in 1862. As we see, Duchenne's study was unique for its use of photographs of partially occluded faces as illustrations. Indeed, particular features of Julie's face have been treated as discrepant, contrasting elements in the portrait. Morisot has given Julie's mouth an unusual appearance. Angled slightly to correspond with the tilt of her head, the right corner is finely tapered and turned upward, almost smiling, aiding in the presentation of contentment. The right side of her mouth, executed with lighter tones of red, with white highlights, appearing lower on her face, is shown as blunted, with an uneven taper that turns downward at the corner. Large and green, Julie's eyes stand out as the most arresting aspect of an extremely vivid visage. Her right eye appears to be fuller, more open than the other. Uncanny in its appearance, the left eye, narrowed by constricting eyelids, is slightly askew. Her vision does not seem to be focused in a manner indicative of fully alert, completely willful consciousness. Described as a common mental process by the Belgian psychologist and philosopher Joseph Delboeuf, the division of self as it was exhibited by dreamers who also retain particular faculties of consciousness, as in daydreaming, was likened to the tendency of thought to, quote, manifest itself in the form of dialogue. Unique for its scientific approach to and treatment of the doubling of self in relation to daydreaming, Delboeuf's work signals clearly the inclusion of daydreams within broadening categories and conditions defining the phenomenon of sleep. Assigning the term altruization, a neologism, to the circumstances producing the self as other in dreams, Delboeuf compares the daydream to the ordinary operation of memory. As with the phenomenon of memory, the cerebral process operating while dreaming gives rise to emanations of the self other characters, which are understood to be deliberately formed as well as involuntarily invoked. Delboeuf further likened the splitting of personality of the daydreamer to the writer who creates by means of an internal dialogue, a type of colloquium comprised of his own voice, the voices of characters, and the response of an implied reader. The self is composed of many selves. Identity is multivalent, its aspects united as an entity through the synthesizing power of the mind. It is not surprising Morisot has made use of the color green as a predominant feature in the portrait, used to create outline, shade, and shadowing, qualities of Julie's dress and the color of her eyes, and, of course, used as a principal color in painting the background. Green is a compound color having manifold symbolic associations. Green may represent ideas including life and death, youth, hope, and joy together with anger, jealousy, and change, qualities of the spleen. Conviction that conscious and unconscious states are inextricably interwoven in the identity of man was a notion commonly voiced by 19th-century French thinkers and writers. It was repeatedly invoked by novelists Balzac, Hugo, Nerval, Zola, and others when describing mental processes or while relating the essential traits of human character. The interaction of unconscious and conscious faculties was deemed a metaphysical paradigm that characterized the meaning and purpose of life. For others, communication between the inward, internal self and the outward, public self became an aesthetic doctrine, a paradigm availing of the design and intention of the universe itself. Morisot's daydreamer manifests a wholesome and natural state of being, an enhanced and strengthened existence made possible through the novel forms of knowledge acquired by traveling the secret path leading inward. In a manner corresponding to the aspirations of symbolist poetry, speculative music, and musical aesthetics, Morisot presents the dreamer's experience as a condition availing of the promise of infinite reverie. Julie daydreaming may be thought of as a type of manifesto, announcing Morisot's commitment to symbolist manners and modes of suggestion and evocation as a primary goal of the artist. In this painting, we see the daydreamer's unique ability to create independently by means of natural, inborn traits, a state of being that links the different arenas of the somatic and the psychic, which comprise the domain of individual human potential. As Gaston Bachelard has written, quote, "Reverie is not a mind vacuum. It is rather the gift of an hour which knows the plenitude of the soul." End quote.